So one other question that comes up, and it's come up quite regularly, this one, is it possible to know for sure when the grieving process is actually complete?
So I think this idea of, that grief ends, that you kind of forget and move on, is um, a very outdated model of grief. And our understanding of how we operate as human beings and how we feel and adapt has really changed. So, the amazing psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about the phases and stages of grief, and, from denial finally through the steps to acceptance. And that people, I think, made the assumption that acceptance is your grief is over. You kind of turn the page and you're in a new chapter and you go on. But actually, we're not machines. And so grief, what we understand is that grief changes us, and it changes our relationship with ourselves, with the person that died, and with our life. And so hopefully, we are all wired to adapt, and that grief, when you don't have trauma, is a naturally adaptive process. So we will, the intensity of the pain changes, and we do find that we don't cry so much, and you wake up and you kind of have a little bit of hope and you start smiling, and that can be difficult to transition into kind of being okay, having been really intensely grieving. But over time that does adapt and grow, and people talk about you're being in your new normal. But because we are sentient beings and grief is embodied, we can have a wave of grief that can feel like yesterday, from smelling somebody's chicken curry that reminds you of your mum or your grandmother, from seeing the back of someone's head that you think looks like them, or just having a thought or a piece of music. And then people often think, oh my God, I haven't done the work. I haven't done my grieving properly. But actually, you have done the grieving properly. It's an ongoing relationship with the person that's died. The task is to face the reality of the death and adjust and find a way of living with that, accommodate it. But there will often, at big days, Christmases, remembrance days, those can bring back, milestone days is the word I was looking for. Those can be really sad. And the thing is not to berate yourself for grieving and thinking you haven't done it, but to support yourself through it and I think rituals are incredibly helpful, choosing to do things that mark both the presence of the absence, that you're grieving that person, and and being with people that support you.
And is there interestingly a time when people are coming out of it and they realize they perhaps haven't thought of their loved one for a while, and then a feeling of guilt comes up from that side of it as well?
Very much so. So there's this, I've often seen it with clients. There's this, it's not exactly a battle, but on the one hand, that we talk about continuing bonds, the relationship with the person continues because you face the reality of the death and come to terms with the fact that they're no longer physically present, but the love for that person never dies. And there's this relationship with the person, and it can be that you imagine them in your heart, or you imagine them in the cemetery or in the sky, or whatever you kind of where for you that belief where their presence is in their soul, or in heaven. And it can be this sort of feeling that they're watching you. And so there's the sense that I need to show the person that's died that I'm missing them and that I'm suffering, so that they know that I miss them, and that I need to demonstrate that by suffering. And so when you find yourself roaring with laughter or having a moment of joy, it's like, oh, I feel bad because whoever the name of the person is going to think I don't miss them anymore. And so my response often to that is that you can have your person front of mind, where you're kind of putting time aside to remember them, and you're journaling, or you're looking at a photograph, or you're doing a ritual, cooking their favorite meal. And then you can have them back of mind. So you put them in a kind of safe place psychologically, in heaven or wherever you imagine them to be, and you have your day. And that matches the dual process model of grieving, of restorative, of loss orientation, where you focus on the grief and you allow yourself to feel the pain, and restoration orientation, where you get on with your life and you live in the present, and it's the oscillation between the two. And often we don't have control over when we're loss oriented or when we're restoration oriented, but I think we can influence it and use our agency over it, because where we put our attention and where we put our choices and what we do with our time influences how we feel. So you can't stop yourself feeling, because, you know, again, we're human beings, but I think we can support ourselves to be in the direction of a particular way of feeling.